Let me tell you about two families. The first family lives in the north of England in 1970. One income, one earner. Father works at the local factory. Mother manages the home. They buy a house for roughly 4 times the annual salary. They own a car, they eat real food cooked at home every night, they take a week's holiday in Scarborough every summer, and at the end of each month, there is money left over. They are not rich. They are solidly, reliably, comfortably middle class. The second family lives in the same town today. 2 incomes, both working full-time. Combined earnings that, in real terms, are substantially higher than that 1970s family. They cannot afford to buy a house in most parts of the country. Childcare costs almost as much as one of their salaries. They eat out or order in 3 or 4 nights a week because there is no time to cook. They carry credit card debt. They feel financially anxious in a way that the 1970s family simply did not. Despite earning more in real terms, they feel poorer. They are poorer. And in this video, we are going to explain exactly why. Because the answer is not what most people assume, and it exposes a system that benefited enormously from the addition of a second income, while quietly making sure that almost none of that benefit stayed in the hands of the families who provided it. Let us start with the world that one income built, because you cannot understand what we lost until you understand what we had. Chapter 1. The world one income built. In the early 1970s, the average UK house price was approximately £9,000. The average single male full-time wage was approximately £2,265 per year. That is a house price-to-income ratio of roughly 4 to 1. A site index stuck to 59.1, the average home during the 1970s required 4.1 times income. Doc's site. Today, index says 59.1, the average homebuyer requires 8.8 times income to cover the cost of a home, more than doubling since the 1970s/site, to put that in the starkest possible terms. Site index 1255 house prices have skyrocketed by 2,385% in 50 years, increasing from just £10,978 in 1975 to £272,819 in 2025. Salaries over the same period have grown by only 1,400%. The maths is brutal. If wages had kept pace with property inflation, the average salary today would need to be over £116,000. It is not. It is £39,000. That gap between what houses cost and what wages provide represents the single most important economic fact in the lives of working British people under the age of 50, and we need to understand exactly how we got there. But before we talk about housing, we need to talk about something that most economic analysis of this period entirely ignores. The invisible worker. Chapter 2. The invisible worker. The single-income middle class of the 1960s and 1970s was not actually a single-income household. It ran on 2 workers. One of them was paid, the other was not. And the one who was not paid contributed an enormous amount of real economic value that the household would otherwise have had to purchase from the market. She cooked every meal from scratch, eliminating the need for eating out or delivery. She maintained the home, eliminating the need for cleaners. She managed the household budget, planned the shopping to minimize waste, and stretched every pound. She provided full-time childcare, eliminating what would today be the household's largest discretionary expense. She drove the children to school, managed appointments, handled correspondence, and kept the household running at a level of operational efficiency that a modern dual-income couple with 2 demanding careers simply cannot replicate. This was not a lesser role. It was a critical economic function that the market was not being paid to provide. And when that function moved out of the home and into the market, somebody charged for it. The market always charges for things it has not been charging for before. This is the foundational reality that all honest discussions of dual income Britain must begin with. The second income did not simply add to the household. It also created a new set of costs that did not exist when the first worker was managing the home. Chapter 3. What happened when the second income arrived? The transformation of Britain into a dual-income economy was not overnight. It happened across the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, driven by a combination of legislative change, economic necessity, and cultural shift. By the late 1990s, the dual-income household had become the norm rather than the exception. And at exactly that point, the economy began repricing itself around the new reality. Here is the mechanism that most people have never seen explained properly. Housing is a fundamentally limited resource. There are only so many houses in any given area. The price of a house is not determined by what it costs to build it. It is determined by what the most motivated buyer in that market is willing and able to pay. When households move from one income to two, they do not simply become more comfortable. They become more competitive in the housing market. A dual-income couple competing for a three-bedroom semi in 1995 against a single-income family will win almost every time, because they can bid higher. And when everyone has two incomes, everyone bids higher, and prices adjust upward to reflect the new reality. This is not a conspiracy. It is basic supply and demand applied to a fixed resource. The second income did not buy the dual-income family a bigger house or a better life. It bought them the same house at twice the price, requiring twice the income to afford it. The housing market absorbed the second income. It did not reward it. And this is precisely what happened in Britain. Site index plus 55 won in 1975, a couple would need just 8 months of saving to accumulate a deposit for a house, setting aside 20% of their combined income. Today, the same exercise takes 3 years and 11 months. Site index 655 won in 1975, the average deposit was just 13% of two people's annual salary. Today, it is 78%. Sex site. The second income did not make buying a house easier. It made it harder because the entire market repriced upward to meet the new level of household income. Chapter 4. The new expenses that nobody warned you about, but the housing market is only the most visible part of the trap. The second income created an entirely new category of household expenses that simply did not exist when one person was managing the home. And those expenses consumed a significant portion of the new income before it ever reached the family's net financial position. Childcare is the most significant. Site index SO 67-1 numbers the average weekly cost of a full-time nursery place in England in 2026 is £149 per week for a child under 2. That is approximately £7,748 per year. Site. Even with the government's expanded 30-hour free childcare entitlement, which since September 2025 has been extended to children from 9 months old, many families face net childcare costs of between £5,000 and £15,000 per year, depending on their child's age, their income, and their location. Site index CESTA 68 won the Institute for Fiscal Studies, documented families spending 17% of pre-tax income on childcare for 1- and 2-year-olds. In the UK, gross childcare fees take up a larger share of household income than almost anywhere else in the OECD/site. And there is a calculation that every dual-income family with young children should do, but most never do properly. site index stus 6814 for some families. The second parent taking a job means they are working for £3 to £4 per hour after all costs are accounted for. That is not a rhetorical point. That is the actual effective wage once childcare, commuting, professional clothing, convenience food, and the outsourcing of household tasks are subtracted from the gross salary /site. Then there are the transport costs. The 1970s family needed one car. The dual-income family needs two, with two insurance policies, two fuel budgets, two sets of maintenance costs, and in many cases two commuting season tickets or parking fees on top. Then there is the food. When both partners are working full-time and commuting, the domestic engineering function collapses. Nobody has time to plan a week of meals, shop for fresh ingredients, and cook from scratch every evening. So the family outsources it. They buy more convenience food, more ready meals, more takeaways, more restaurant meals at weekends, more coffee on the way to the office. British families are now spending more on eating out and food delivery than they are on grocery shopping, not because they are extravagant, because they are exhausted and time poor in a way that the 1970s single-income household with its full-time domestic manager simply was not. And then there is the outsourcing of everything else that the domestic engineer used to provide for free. Cleaning services, ironing services, school holiday childcare programs, after-school clubs, grocery delivery fees. The list is long, and each item is individually small. But together they represent hundreds of pounds per month that the 1970s household never spent because one person was managing all of it without charge. Chapter 5. The System That Won. Here is the part of this story that nobody tells you. When Britain transitioned to a dual-income economy, three parties benefited enormously, and the British middle-class family was not one of them. The property market benefited. As we have established, house prices were priced upward to absorb the new level of household income. The wealth transferred from homeowners in the 1970s and 1980s who bought at low multiples of income has been staggering. The government benefited. Two income earners pay income tax individually. The 1970s single-income household paid one lot of income tax and national insurance on one salary. The dual-income household of today pays two lots of income tax and national insurance on two salaries. The tax take from British households increased dramatically as women entered the workforce, not because any individual's tax rate changed, but because there were twice as many taxable incomes. Nobody in government has ever felt the need to point this out loudly. And the childcare, food delivery, cleaning, and convenience services industries benefited. Every function that the domestic engineer used to perform for free inside the household is now a paid service generating revenue and corporation tax and employment. The economy grew enormously when women entered the workforce. Not primarily because of the value of their labor directly, though that mattered too, but because the enormous amount of work that had been done unpaid inside households was suddenly being done by paid services in the market. All of which showed up in GDP figures that made politicians feel good about themselves. The middle-class family did not get richer. The economy got bigger. They are not the same thing. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. Here is what makes this situation genuinely difficult to escape from at the individual level. The system has now repriced itself so completely around dual income assumptions that dropping back to one income is not a choice that most British families can make without catastrophic financial consequences. A site index Stuckel 55 1 in 2025, the median average home in England cost £300,000, which is 7.6 times the median annual earnings of a full-time employee. Site. The mortgage on that home, on a 25-year term at current rates, requires a household income that one salary simply cannot support in most parts of the country. The childcare costs that were supposed to enable the second income to work now trap the family in needing the second income just to cover the childcare. The two-car household cannot function on one car because both partners need to commute. The outsourced domestic functions cannot be brought back in-house because there is nobody in the house to do them. The whole system has locked in around two incomes, and the floor has been pulled up. A family that was just about managing on two incomes has almost no room for one of those incomes to disappear, even temporarily. When one partner loses a job, or takes maternity leave, or becomes ill, or decides they want to reduce their hours to care for a child or an aging parent, the financial consequences are immediate and severe. The safety margin that the 1970s single-income family had, where one income was running the household and the other could theoretically be added as a buffer, has been completely eliminated. Both incomes are not a luxury, they are the structural minimum. And that is a form of financial fragility that the middle class of 50 years ago never experienced. Chapter 7. What you can actually do about it. Now, this video is not designed to make you feel helpless. It is designed to make you see the system clearly. Because once you see it clearly, you can make decisions inside it more intelligently than someone who is simply following the default path. The first and most important principle is to treat your three largest expenses as the game itself, not as background costs. Housing, transport, childcare, if you have children. ftse Index Sex 59 1-ONS data confirms these categories represent 50 to 60% of the typical British household budget. N/ftse. The decisions you make on these three categories will determine your financial life far more than any other decisions you make. A decision to buy a smaller house in a slightly less fashionable area, or to live close enough to one workplace that one car suffices, or to structure your childcare around grandparents or a childminder rather than a full-time nursery. Each of these decisions can be worth thousands of pounds per year and tens of thousands over a decade. These are not small optimizations, they are the game. The second principle is to understand the time and money trade-off explicitly, rather than defaulting to convenience. Every time you outsource a domestic function, you are converting your time into money spent. That is sometimes the right trade. Paying for a cleaner so that you can spend Saturday afternoon with your children instead of cleaning bathrooms is a reasonable exchange. But if you are outsourcing everything on autopilot because you have always done it that way, you are hemorrhaging money on functions that a more intentional household could manage for free. The third principle is to recognize that the dual income trap is not inevitable for everyone. For some couples, particularly in the early years of raising children, the arithmetic of one parent reducing hours or stopping work temporarily is not as straightforwardly negative as it appears. ftse Index 68 1-1 analysis found that a mother returning to full-time work on an average salary after childcare costs and commuting expenses took home just £180 per month. /cite. £180. That is the net financial contribution of a full-time working week, a full-time commute, and the complete dismantling of any domestic management capacity. In cases like this, the financially rational decision may be the one that looks, on the surface, like the more traditional one. The point is not to tell anyone what choices to make. The point is to do the actual maths before assuming that the second income is always and automatically a net positive. The dual income economy was sold to Britain as progress, and in many real and important ways it was. More people participating in economic life, more autonomy, more choice. but the economic consequences of that transition have been absorbed almost entirely by the middle-class families who lived through it. While the property market, the government's tax base, and the convenience economy all expanded on the back of it. The middle class did not get richer when both partners went to work. The middle class got trapped. Understanding that trap is the first step toward navigating it with your eyes open rather than being carried along by a system that is working very well indeed for everyone except you. If this changed the way you see your household finances, please hit the like button and subscribe to UK Finance with Peter for more straight-talking content on money and the economy for people living and working in Britain. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.